Have you ever felt the profound weight of a memory, so real it guides your every move? Imagine carrying on a legacy not just through stories, but through the very essence of what was left behind. Our story today begins with a whisper of disrespect, a mocking laugh echoing across the skies as a lone old aircraft strays into forbidden territory. But what these young, confident pilots don't know is that the faded numbers on that plane's tail hold a power beyond their comprehension, a silent testament to a hero who shaped the very fabric of their world. Join us as we uncover a tale where quiet symbols command the skies, reminding us that some legacies never fade. They just wait for the right moment to soar again. Nice plane, ma'am. Hope that museum piece can handle today's skies. A mocking laugh crackled over the F-16 radio as a formation of sleek fighters closed in around the small, lone aircraft that had inadvertently strayed into restricted airspace. But then, as one pilot drew closer, his voice abruptly cut off. His eyes locked onto the tail numbers, clear and unmistakable. Who was she? Why did a single old-fashioned number render the entire squadron silent in an instant? Wherever you are in the world, watching this story unfold, stay with us as we reveal how quiet symbols still command the skies in ways few expect. Captain Riley Monroe, 40 years old, carried the weight of a legendary legacy. She was the daughter of Colonel Daniel Monroe, a name revered in Air Force circles. 20 years prior, he had led a daring classified mission that saved an entire squadron against overwhelming odds. After his passing, Riley stepped away from the military and became a civilian pilot, channeling her grief and devotion into restoring her father's old T-38 Talon jet. The aircraft bore the tail number 73107, etched into aviation history, a symbol of valor and sacrifice. The restoration spanned 3 painstaking years. Every rivet was meticulously replaced, every wire reconnected, and each control surface rebuilt to exact factory specifications. For Riley, this wasn't simply a mechanical project. It was a lifeline to her father, a bridge to the man she had lost too soon. When the Talon finally roared back to life and lifted into the sky, she closed her eyes for a fleeting moment as the wheels left the runway. The hum and vibration of the airframe beneath her echoed those childhood days when her father had let her sit beside him in the cockpit. To Riley, this flight wasn't a mere test. It was a whispered conversation across time, a chance to feel his presence once more. But lost in those swirling emotions, Riley unknowingly drifted into a heavily restricted military training zone. The no-fly area spanned miles around the base and was clearly marked on all official charts. Still, her focus was elsewhere. When her aircraft appeared on radar, the nearby airbase scrambled a flight of F-16s. To them, the intruder was unknown, possibly hostile, and unquestionably out of place. Unidentified aircraft, came the firm professional transmission over the radio. You have entered restricted military airspace. Identify yourself immediately and change course. Riley's heart dropped. She hadn't meant to breach protocol. This is civilian aircraft N30U-87T, she replied calmly, using the registration sheet assigned to the restored Talon. I appear to have entered your airspace inadvertently. Request permission to egress. Negative, N3817T. You will be escorted to our facility for inspection. Military aircraft are inbound to intercept. Through her canopy, Riley watched the F-16s accelerate, sleek and deadly, cutting through the afternoon light with razor-sharp precision. These fighters were the pinnacle of modern technology, far beyond the planes her father had flown. But the T-38 Talon beneath her was no ordinary trainer jet. It was the very plane her father had piloted during that legendary mission. An aircraft that had defied impossible odds, evaded enemy fire, and returned home when everyone else thought it was lost. The young F-16 pilots closing in had no idea what they were facing. To them, it was just another civilian straying off course, an unauthorized presence in a restricted zone. They couldn't possibly understand that those faded tail numbers symbolized one of the most heroic chapters in Air Force history. They had no way of knowing the woman at the controls was carrying a legacy born from blood, bravery, and sacrifice. As the fighters drew nearer, Riley steadied the Talon. Her hands gripped the controls with the same sure confidence her father once had. She wasn't just piloting an aircraft, she was commanding a living piece of history. The radio buzzed with the voices of pilots about to discover that some numbers carried weight far beyond regulations, and some legacies demanded respect that no rank could grant. The F-16s closed in confidently, their pilots treating the intercept as just another routine exercise in modern air superiority. Their chatter on the radio was casual, laced with the arrogance of youth facing what they saw as outdated machinery. "Nice plane, ma'am," the lead F-16 pilot sneered, his voice dripping with mockery. His wingman laughed, adding with obvious amusement, "Hope that museum piece can survive modern airspace. Think that old trainer can keep pace with the real fighters? This ought to be entertaining." Riley's chest tightened with a surge of anger, but she swallowed it down. They had no idea what they were talking about, no clue what this aircraft had been through, no understanding of the legacy they were mocking. "Dad, I'm sorry," she thought, her fingers tightening around the control stick. The lead F-16 edged closer, trying to get a better look at the aircraft they were escorting. His tone turned even more condescending as he keyed his radio. "Control, this is Viper Lead. We've got some weekend warrior flying an old T-38, probably lost, trying to find the nearest air show." "Copy. Viper led. Escort to base for inspection. Treat as routine civilian violation." Riley kept steady on her heading and altitude, obedient to the F-16's commands, while battling the storm inside her. These young pilots saw only an aging trainer flown by a civilian who'd made a navigation mistake. They had no idea they were flying alongside a living piece of aviation history. Inside the cockpit of the lead F-16, Captain Jake Mitchell adjusted his position to keep the T-38 in sight. At 26 years old, fresh from advanced fighter training, his confidence was unshakable. He looked down on anything that wasn't cutting-edge tech. "Bet she's some rich collector just showing off her toy," Mitchell thought as he spoke to his wingman. "These civilians think they can treat military airspace like their own playground." As he spoke, Mitchell pushed his F-16 closer for a better view of the T-38's markings. Unlike modern military jets, equipped with advanced identification systems, older civilian planes often relied on visual tail numbers for ID. What he saw next made his blood run cold. The numbers on the tail weren't civilian registration. Faded but still legible, painted in military stencil, were the digits 731107. Those numbers hit him like a physical blow. Every Air Force pilot knew that number. It was woven into their heritage, their identity as aviators. At the Air Force Academy, the legendary flight of 731107 was a cornerstone lesson, a tale of courage every fighter pilot was required to know. Mitchell's face drained of color beneath his helmet. He wasn't just looking at an old aircraft anymore. He was staring at a living, breathing page of Air Force history. His hands trembled on the controls as the weight of the realization settled in. 20 years ago, this very plane had flown straight into hell and brought an entire squadron back home. The pilot who flew it that day had become a legend, a ghost story whispered among those who understood what true heroism looked like. "Control," Mitchell's voice cracked over the radio, shaking with shock. "Hold all aggressive actions. Repeat. Hold fire. We have 731107 airborne. I repeat, the Colonel's legacy is in the sky." Silence fell across the radio frequencies. Control towers, radar operators, every pilot listening suddenly grasped the magnitude of the moment. Viper 2, Mitchell's wingman, closed in to confirm what his lead had seen. When the numbers came into focus on his own HUD, recognition dawned on him, and he too fell silent in awe. Targeting the display, his reaction was immediate and filled with reverence. "Jesus Christ," he whispered softly over the radio. "It's really her. It's really the Colonel's bird." In that instant, the entire tone of the intercept shifted. What had been a routine airspace enforcement transformed into something akin to a sacred moment. The earlier arrogance evaporated, replaced by a profound awe and respect for the presence they were witnessing. Riley, listening in on the military frequency, caught the subtle change in their voices, but didn't quite grasp the full weight of it. She knew her father's aircraft was special, but until now, she hadn't realized just how deeply his legacy was woven into the culture of the Air Force. "Ma'am," Mitchell's voice came again, entirely stripped of its previous mocking edge, now carrying a tone of solemn respect. Are you related to Colonel Daniel Monroe?" Riley pressed her microphone, her voice steady despite the rapid beat of her heart. "He was my father. The silence that followed was deafening, louder than the roar of any jet engine. In that moment, past and present collided high above the military training grounds. The daughter of a legend was piloting her father's aircraft, flying through airspace guarded by pilots who had grown up on stories of his bravery and sacrifice. Behind Mitchell's visor, tears welled up. His own father had been the crew chief on the mission that had immortalized Colonel Monroe. The tales he'd heard since childhood about a pilot who refused to leave anyone behind had inspired him to join the Air Force himself. "Ma'am," Mitchell transmitted again, his voice thick with emotion, "it's an honor to share the sky with you and the Colonel." At that moment, the arrogance of assumption met the chilling weight of undeniable truth. A faded tail number spoke louder than any modern technology, reminding everyone present that some things deserve remembrance, not because they are etched into official records, but because they become part of the very soul of an institution. The radio silence that followed Riley's revelation lasted only seconds, but stretched into what felt like an eternity. Control towers across the region, which moments before had treated this as a routine violation, suddenly accessed files stamped with the highest security clearances. Viper-led, Viper 2, maintain current formation but switch to escort protocol, came an urgent order from ground control. We are verifying identity and mission status. Colonel Sarah Martinez, the base commander, was immediately briefed. She had been a young lieutenant 2 decades earlier when Colonel Daniel Monroe led Operation Guardian Thunder, the daring mission that saved her squadron from certain destruction behind enemy lines. She knew firsthand that the stories surrounding Monroe were far from myth. "Get me everything we have on that aircraft," Martinez ordered her operations officer, "and patch me through to those pilots right away. I want to speak to Monroe's daughter personally." Within minutes, classified files appeared on secure screens throughout the command center. Though heavily redacted due to the sensitive nature of his missions, Colonel Daniel Monroe's service record revealed a tapestry of extraordinary heroism few pilots could rival. Then, a new voice crackled over the radio, carrying an authority that made the 2 F-16 pilots sit up straighter in their cockpits. "Ms. Monroe, this is Colonel Martinez, base commander. Your father saved my life 20 years ago. You have full clearance to proceed on any heading you require." Riley felt tears welling behind her flight helmet. For so many years, she had carried the memory of her father in quiet solitude, working tirelessly to restore his aircraft alone. To receive such recognition from someone who had actually served alongside him was overwhelming, stirring a deep and healing sense of connection she had longed for, but never fully found. "It's overwhelming. Thank you, Colonel," Riley managed to say, fighting to keep her voice steady despite the surge of emotions inside her. All she ever wanted was to honor her father's memory by bringing his aircraft back to life in the sky. Captain Mitchell, still visibly shaken after recognizing the tail number, carefully guided his F-16 to fall into perfect formation beside Riley's T-38. For the first time, he could clearly see her through the canopy of the Talon. She looked smaller than the legends had made her out to be, yet every ounce of her focus was locked on flying and preserving this precious piece of history. "Ma'am," Mitchell transmitted, his tone stripped of the earlier arrogance, replaced by deep respect. "My father was Staff Sergeant Mike Mitchell, crew chief for the 49th Fighter Squadron. He was one of the ground crew who prepared your father's aircraft for Operation Guardian Thunder." The weight of that simple statement lingered in the air, building an invisible bridge between generations. Riley's mind immediately recalled her father's stories about the tireless ground crews who had worked around the clock, keeping his aircraft mission-ready during the most perilous operations he ever flew. "Your father was part of the team that kept my dad flying," she said quietly. Mitchell's throat tightened, a lump forming as he fought to hold back his emotions. "He was a good man." "Ma'am, my father always said Colonel Monroe was the pilot who proved courage wasn't measured by the size of your aircraft or the power of your weapons," Mitchell continued, his voice trembling with reverence. "It's about the size of your heart and the refusal to leave anyone behind." Growing up, Mitchell had heard countless stories from his father about the day Colonel Monroe had taken off in that very T-38, flying headlong into impossible odds to extract a downed squadron trapped deep in hostile territory. Tactical experts had called the mission suicidal, but Monroe had insisted that no American pilot would be abandoned as long as he still had fuel and ammunition. "Ma'am," Mitchell's voice grew thick with emotion, "Colonel Monroe's legacy lives on in every mission we fly. We learned about Operation Guardian Thunder at the Academy, But hearing it from someone who actually repped his aircraft, well, it feels different, personal. Colonel Martinez suddenly took over the radio, her voice clear and authoritative. Ms. Monroe, I want you to know that what your father did that day didn't just save our squadron. It changed the entire way the Air Force approaches rescue operations. The Monroe Doctrine, as we call it now, became the gold standard for every no-pilot left-behind mission. Riley was stunned. She had always known her father was respected, but she had never realized the full scope of his impact on Air Force culture. I had no idea, she admitted honestly. He never talked about those missions when he came home. That's because your father was a true professional, Martinez answered gently. He understood that heroism isn't about glory. It's about doing the right thing when no one is watching and staying humble when everyone is. Meanwhile, the F-16 pilots began repositioning themselves, shifting from intercept to escort formation. What had started as a tense, hostile encounter was now something unprecedented. Modern fighters providing an honor guard for a living piece of history. Viper 2 to base, Mitchell's wingman transmitted. Request permission to coordinate a full ceremonial escort. This aircraft deserves proper recognition. Permission granted. Viper 2, coordinate with tower for priority routing, came the quick response. As the unusual formation moved steadily across the vast desert sky, Riley realized she was no longer just flying a plane. She was part of something far greater. She was carrying forward her father's legacy, surrounded by pilots who understood that some traditions went beyond regulations, and some honors were too sacred to ever be forgotten. Ms. Monroe, Martinez's voice came over the radio as they neared the base. I'd like to invite you to land here as our guest. There are people stationed here who served alongside your father, and I think they would be truly honored to see his aircraft soaring once more. Riley glanced down at the sprawling base beneath her, the hangars and runways a silent testament to the past, a place her father had once called home. I'd be honored, Colonel. Outstanding. The voice over the radio was steady, yet carried a hint of reverence. You're cleared for priority landing on runway 27. Maintenance crews are standing by to service your aircraft if needed. As Riley began her careful descent toward the base, Mitchell flew in tight formation beside Hirscher, escorting her all the way down to the runway. The other aircraft parked on the tarmac held their positions respectfully, clearing the way for the T-38 that carried far more history than any museum could boast. Viper lead to tower, Mitchell transmitted smoothly as they entered the traffic pattern. Escorting 731-107 for landing. Please advise all ground personnel that this is Colonel Monroe's aircraft. The tower's reply came thick with emotion. Copy, Viper lead. Historic aircraft, 731-107, you are cleared to land. Welcome home. As Riley's T-38's wheels kissed the familiar runway where her father once flew countless sorties, a quiet smile crept onto her face. The plane, once dismissed moments ago as an obsolete relic, was now receiving the honor it so rightly deserved from the entire airbase. Through the clear canopy, she could see ground crews and pilots gathering, eager to catch a glimpse of the legendary aircraft. Some were veterans old enough to have flown alongside Colonel Monroe, while others knew him only through the tales passed down in Air Force history. Her father's legacy was not confined to the aircraft she now piloted. It was alive in the culture of courage and dedication that inspired every new pilot who understood that certain things are preserved not by order, but because it is simply the right thing to do. When Riley finally shut down the engines and climbed out of the cockpit, she was met with a reception far beyond anything she had imagined. Veterans who had served under her father stood at respectful attention, while younger airmen circled the plane with curiosity, having studied its history in their classes. Colonel Martinez was the first to approach, her hand extended and her voice thick with feeling. Ms. Monroe, it is an honor to finally meet Daniel Monroe's daughter. Your father saved my life and the lives of 7 other pilots 20 years ago. Riley accepted the handshake, catching the deep gratitude shining in Martinez's eyes. He never told me about the specifics of those missions, Riley admitted softly. I knew he was respected, but I never fully understood the scope of what he had done. An older man stepped forward from the crowd, his posture unmistakably military despite his civilian clothes. Ma'am, I'm retired Chief Master Sergeant Mike Mitchell, Captain Mitchell's father. I was the crew chief for your dad's aircraft during Operation Guardian Thunder. Riley looked between the elderly man and the young F-16 pilot who had escorted her in. "So, this is a family's tradition of service," she said with a knowing smile. "Yes, ma'am," the elder Mitchell replied solemnly. "Your father taught us that taking care of the aircraft meant taking care of the pilot, and taking care of the pilot meant everyone came home." Captain Jake Mitchell joined the conversation, still visibly moved by the day's events. "Ma'am, I want to apologize for our earlier comments. We had no idea what we were intercepting." Riley studied the young pilot's earnest face. "You were doing your job, Captain. My father would have understood that. But maybe now you see why some aircraft deserve a special kind of respect." Over the hours that followed, Riley found herself at the heart of an impromptu reunion. Veterans shared stories about her father she had never heard before, while younger officers peppered her with questions about the T-38's restoration and its significance. Then the base museum curator approached with an unexpected request. "Miss Monroe, we would be honored to create a permanent display about your father's service. Would you consider loaning us some of his personal effects?" Riley paused, weighing the offer carefully. "I'd be willing to share some items," she said finally, "but I want to keep flying this aircraft. It's what he would have wanted." The curator was emphatic. Living history carried far more weight than static exhibits ever could. Colonel Sarah Martinez understood this deeply. So, she arranged for Captain Riley Monroe to speak to a group of young pilots in training. Standing inside the very briefing room where her father had once received his mission orders, Riley felt the gravity of continuing his legacy pressing on her shoulders. With steady conviction, she addressed the attentive faces before her. "Your aircraft don't measure your courage," she said quietly but firmly. "The pilot who flew this T-38 showed us all that heart matters far more than horsepower, and that sheer determination will always outmatch the latest technology." The room fell silent, then erupted with a respectful, genuine response. These young aviators recognized they were hearing from someone who carried true military heritage, not just in stories, but in her very presence. After the briefing, Captain Jake Mitchell approached Riley with earnestness. "Ma'am, would you consider coming back for our annual heritage celebration? I truly believe the entire Air Force community could benefit from hearing these stories firsthand." Riley's eyes drifted toward the flight line, where her father's T-38 rested quietly among rows of sleek, modern fighters. It no longer seemed out of place. Instead, it stood proud, like the honored elder of the squadron, a symbol of history and inspiration. "I think I'd like that," she said softly. "Dad always believed stories were only valuable if they were shared." As the evening shadows lengthened and Riley prepared to leave, she realized this was no longer just a personal journey to honor her father's memory. The T-38 had become far more. It was a bridge connecting generations of aviators. The faded tail number, 73107, had quietly reminded an entire airbase that legends don't retire. They wait patiently, ready to inspire the next generation when the moment comes. 6 months later, Riley received a call that brought her father's legacy full circle. "Miss Monroe, this is Colonel Martinez," the voice said. "We have a downed pilot in hostile territory. Our modern aircraft can't reach the location due to the terrain, but analysis suggests an aircraft with the flight characteristics of a T-38 might be able to make the approach." Riley didn't hesitate. "Send me the coordinates." "There's something you should know," Martinez added carefully. "This mission would be strictly voluntary. The parameters are very challenging." Riley looked at the aircraft that had once belonged to her father. It gleamed now with fresh paint, but still bore the legendary tail number, 73107. "Colonel," Riley said quietly, "some things are worth the risk." As she prepared for the rescue mission, she found herself surrounded by the same F-16 pilots who had once mocked her aircraft. Captain Mitchell approached again, this time with obvious respect shining in his eyes. "Ma'am, we'd be honored to provide escort. The Monroe Doctrine states no pilot flies alone when lives are at stake." Riley glanced upward to see the familiar formation of F-16s preparing for takeoff. But today, they weren't interceptors. They were guardians, protecting a mission that united past and present in the most profound way possible. The rescue was a success. Riley's T-38, with its superior agility and smaller profile, was able to land in terrain inaccessible to larger aircraft. Another pilot returned home because someone understood that sometimes older technology guided by courage and experience, could achieve what the newest equipment could not. As they flew back to base through clear desert skies, Riley reflected on how much had changed. The aircraft, once dismissed as obsolete, had become irreplaceable. The legacy that had felt like a burden was now a source of strength. The young pilots who once questioned the value of older aircraft now sought opportunities to learn from the past. They had discovered that innovation without respect for tradition was incomplete, and technology without wisdom was hollow. In a world obsessed with the newest and fastest, many had forgotten that some things only grow more valuable with age. Courage, honor, and the refusal to abandon those in need, these qualities transcended generations and could neither be upgraded nor replaced. Riley didn't seek recognition or ceremonies. She only needed to know that when lives hung in the balance, there were people ready to trust proven values over fleeting trends. When her T-38 touched down that evening, the faded tail number still visible on its side, Riley was surrounded by pilots who had learned the most vital lesson of military aviation. Some numbers don't just identify aircraft, they identify legends. Heroes may leave, but the sky never forgets. And sometimes all it takes to remind everyone is a set of numbers that refuse to fade. The legacy of 731007 lived on, not in museums or history books, but in the hearts of those who understood that true service never retires.